The morning of her 63rd birthday, Clara Bennett sat on the creaking porch swing of her modest craftsman home in suburban Ohio. A mug of black coffee warming her hands. The air was crisp, carrying the faint chirp of sparrows and the rustle of leaves skittering across her patchy lawn. Stubbornly brown despite her best efforts with the sprinkler, 63 wasn't a milestone. Not like 50 or 70. It was just a number. Heavy and tired, much like Clara herself felt these days. The crossword puzzle lay half-finished on the wicker table beside her. A pen tucked into its folds. For 3 years, silence had defined her relationship with her son, Nathan. No calls, no letters, not even a card when she'd battled pneumonia or when her sister passed. The quiet had settled into her bones. A lonely comfort she'd learned to live with. Then came the knock. A single, deliberate thud against the front door, followed by the soft crunch of footsteps retreating down the gravel path. It wasn't the hurried rap of the mail carrier or the timid tap of the neighbor's kid hawking fundraiser coupons. Just one knock, then silence. Clara set her coffee down, her bare feet brushing the cool wooden planks as she crossed the porch. She opened the door to find a small package on the welcome mat. Wrapped in plain brown paper, tied with a thin blue ribbon. The handwriting on the label was unmistakable, sharp, precise, like an architect's blueprint, inked in blue. Clara Bennett, Nathan's hand. Her breath caught. 3 years of nothing, and now this. She whispered her name, testing its weight, as if it might belong to someone else when written by him. Inside, Clara carried the package to the kitchen, placing it on the oak table beside her cold coffee. She reheated the mug in the microwave, the hum filling the quiet house. But her eyes never left the box. Part of her wanted to tear it open, to see what Nathan could possibly say after all this time. Another part, heavier and wary, urged her to leave it untouched. What could break 3 years of silence? Curiosity won, as it often does. She untied the ribbon with care, peeling back the paper to reveal a white box nestled within. Inside, cushioned by delicate tissue paper, were dozens of cookies, each one a tiny work of art. Blue flowers, golden leaves, stars dusted with shimmering sugar, all meticulously crafted. Nathan, baking? The idea was absurd. He'd never so much as boiled an egg in her presence. Tucked against the lid was a small card. His handwriting as precise as ever. Happy birthday, Mom. Let's start over. Clara's fingers trembled as she held the note, reading it again and again, searching for meaning in the sparse words. Start over? After 3 years of absence, of unanswered calls and unacknowledged grief? Her throat tightened, not quite a sob, but a quiet ache for something she wanted to believe but didn't trust. She set the card down, her gaze returning to the cookies. They were beautiful, almost too perfect, like something meant to be admired rather than eaten. Clara didn't touch them. Pride, fear, or something deeper held her back, an instinct she couldn't name but refused to ignore. She selected one cookie, a star-shaped one with delicate white icing, and slipped it into a small Tupperware container, sealing it tightly before placing it in the fridge. The rest she wrapped with the same care Nathan had used. The ribbon tied just as neatly. Clara thought of Susan Harper, her son's mother-in-law, who lived a short drive away in a tidy ranch house. Susan had always been kind, especially when Nathan grew distant, offering coffee and conversation when Clara needed it most. If anyone deserved a sweet gesture, it was Susan, and somehow, giving the cookies away felt safer than keeping them, as if their presence in her home carried a weight she wasn't ready to bear. That afternoon, Clara drove to Susan's under a sky streaked with the soft orange of early autumn. The wind chimes on Susan's porch tinkled as Clara handed her the box, brushing off her protests with a smile. Just something small, Clara said, her voice light but her heart uneasy. Back home, she stood in the kitchen, staring at the empty spot on the table where the package had been. Relief mingled with a nagging sense of wrongness, like she'd dodged something she hadn't yet seen. The next morning, as Clara poured her second cup of coffee, the phone rang, sharp and jarring in the stillness. The screen lit up with Nathan's number. Her hand froze mid-pour, coffee splashing onto the counter. It had been so long since anyone called this early. Longer still since that number appeared. The phone buzzed again before she answered. Her voice steady but cautious. Hello? Hi, Mom. Nathan's voice was smooth, casual, as if 3 years hadn't passed. Happy birthday. A little late. I know. Clara sat slowly, gripping the mug with both hands. I got your package, she said, her tone neutral. It was unexpected. He chuckled softly. Wasn't sure you'd open it. Honestly. A pause. Then, too casually. So, how were they? The cookies. I mean. Clara took a breath, choosing her words carefully. I didn't eat them. I gave them to Susan. The line went silent. Not a dropped call, she checked, but a heavy, suffocating quiet. When Nathan spoke again, his voice was different, sharper, the warmth gone. You gave them to Susan? Yes, Clara said, her pulse quickening. She's always loved sweets. I didn't know what to do with them. Another silence, longer this time. She could hear his breathing, tight and uneven, then, quietly at first, but with rising force. You did what? The words stung, sharp and sudden. Clara blinked, stunned. Nathan, what's wrong? They weren't for her, he snapped, his voice cracking, not with sadness, but something else. Frustration? Panic? They were for you. Only you. Clara's grip on the mug tightened, her knuckles white. I didn't know, she said, her voice small. Right. Of course you didn't. The bitterness in his tone was thick, choking. You never do. The line went dead before she could respond. The dial tone hummed in her ear as she set the phone down. Her heart thudding, not fast, but deep, like it demanded to be felt. Only you. His words echoed, heavy with something she couldn't yet name. Clara walked to the fridge. Her movements slow, deliberate. The single cookie sat untouched in its container. The icing still pristine. She stared at it, a chill settling over her. It wasn't just a cookie anymore, it was a question. A warning. She closed the fridge door, the cold air lingering on her skin, and stood in the dim kitchen, wondering what Nathan had meant, and why it felt like a threat. Later that morning, the landline in the hallway crackled to life. A sound so rare it startled her. Almost no one used that number anymore. Clara answered, her voice hesitant. Hello? Clara, it's Laura, Nathan's wife. Her voice was strained, brittle, like glass about to shatter. It's Susan. She's in the hospital. Clara's knees buckled, and she sat heavily on the hall chair. What happened? She collapsed this morning, Laura said, vomiting, disoriented. She couldn't stand. Got confused. I thought it was the flu. But it's worse. The ER's running tests. But they don't know what's wrong. Clara's mouth went dry. Did she eat anything unusual? A pause. Then Laura's voice, cautious. She mentioned cookies. Said you brought them over. Clara's heart stopped for a moment. I did. The ones Nathan sent me. Silence on the line, broken only by the faint hum of hospital noises, beeping monitors. Footsteps. A cart rolling by. Do you think they could have made her sick? Laura asked finally. I don't know. Clara whispered. I didn't eat any myself. Another silence. Heavier this time. If you think of anything at all, let me know, Laura said. Of course, Clara replied, her voice barely audible. They hung up, and Clara sat in the dim hallway, staring at the faded wallpaper. The afternoon sun had faded, leaving the house in a dull haze. She didn't turn on the lights. She didn't move for a long time. That evening, restless and searching for order, Clara wandered into the kitchen. She wiped down counters that were already clean, folded dish towels that didn't need folding. When she opened the trash to empty it, something caught her eye, a small, clear plastic bottle, like the kind vitamins come in, nestled among coffee grounds and paper towels. No label, just a faint ring of white powder clinging to the inside. It wasn't hers. She reached in, her fingers brushing the cold plastic, and turned it over in her hands. Her pulse quickened. She hadn't seen this before. Hadn't thrown it out. Clara opened the fridge again. The cookie was still there, sealed in its container, the star-shaped icing glinting under the light. Her hands shook as she lifted it out. She'd saved it without knowing why, a small act of preservation. A moment of kindness for herself. Now, it felt like evidence. She carried the cookie and the bottle to her small study, setting them on the desk under the glow of the lamp. The sugar crystals sparkled faintly. Almost mocking her, she sat, hands folded, staring at them as if they might speak first. Was she the target? Was this meant for her? The questions loomed, too large to touch, too heavy to ignore. Clara Bennett's heart pounded as she pulled into the driveway of Nathan's pristine suburban home. A modern two-story with manicured hedges and a polished mailbox that gleamed under the Ohio sun. It was late afternoon, the sky a muted gold, casting long shadows across the quiet street. 3 days had passed since Susan's collapse. Since the hospital call that turned Clara's unease into dread. The small plastic bottle from her trash. The cookie still sealed in its Tupperware, and Nathan's sharp, panicked voice on the phone. They were for you. Only you. Had haunted her sleepless nights. She couldn't wait for answers any longer. Clara slipped her phone into her coat pocket. The recording app already running. Its silent red dot a secret ally. She wasn't here as a mother seeking reconciliation. She was here as a woman who needed the truth. No matter how much it hurt. Nathan opened the door with a tight smile. The kind that barely touched his eyes. He looked thinner than Clara remembered. His frame sharp under a neatly pressed sweater. As if something inside him had been slowly eroding. Mom, he said, stepping aside with a practiced ease. This is a surprise. His voice was smooth, but Clara caught the faint edge. A flicker of wariness in his green eyes. I heard about Susan, Clara said, keeping her tone soft, almost apologetic, as she stepped into the foyer. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. Every surface spotless, every object in its place. I wanted to check in. How's she doing? Nathan nodded, gesturing toward the living room. She's still at St. Mary's. Laura's with her. They think it's some kind of virus. His words were measured, but his hands fidgeted, adjusting a coaster on the coffee table that was already perfectly aligned. Clara sat on the edge of the sofa, her purse in her lap, the phone still recording in her pocket. She forced a smile, her heart thudding so loudly she feared he might hear it. I'm sorry we didn't get to talk more the other day, she said, her voice light, as if they were discussing the weather. The cookies were lovely. She watched his face closely, searching for any crack in his composure. Nathan raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Were they? His tone was casual, but his eyes locked onto hers. Searching, calculating. I didn't try them, actually, Clara said, leaning forward slightly, her words deliberate. Susan was thrilled, though. She said the star-shaped one was her favorite. There it was. A flicker. Barely a pause, but enough. Nathan's smile froze, his eyes narrowing for a split second before he recovered. Susan picked the stars, he said, his voice softer now, almost tender. But Clara hadn't mentioned the shape of the cookie Susan ate. She'd only said Susan liked one. The slip was small, but it was enough to send a chill down her spine. He knew which cookie Susan had chosen. Yes, Clara said slowly, her pulse racing but her voice steady. She mentioned it. She held his gaze, refusing to look away. Nathan turned to the kitchen counter, picking up a glass that didn't need washing, rinsing it under the faucet with deliberate care. She always did go for anything pretty, he said, his back to her, his tone light but strained, always more concerned with aesthetics than what's underneath. Clara's eyes flicked to the counter behind him. There, partially obscured by a folded tea towel, was another small plastic bottle, identical to the one she'd found in her trash. Down to the plain cap and the faint residue of white powder inside. Her breath caught, but she kept her expression neutral. You never told me you'd started baking, she said, her voice conversational, testing the waters. Nathan laughed, but it was hollow, off-key. New hobby, he said, still facing the sink. Good way to unwind. Where'd you learn to use monkshood? Clara asked, her voice quiet but sharp, the question slipping out like a blade. Nathan froze, not dramatically, but in the subtle way a predator pauses when it senses a trap. His shoulders stiffened, the glass still in his hand. He turned slowly, his face a mask of calm. But his eyes betrayed him, narrowed. Calculating. I don't know what that is, he said, too quickly, his voice flat. Clara didn't blink. Dr. Marwood does. She let the name hang in the air, watching him closely. I took the cookie to her lab. She ran the tests. It's in there, Nathan. Monkshood. A poison. He set the glass down with exaggerated care. The clink against the counter loud in the silence. You went to Rachel Marwood, he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. And you think, what? That I'm trying to hurt you? He stepped closer, his eyes boring into hers. Accusations like that, Mom, they don't end well, especially without proof. I think you've already given me enough, Clara said quietly, her hand steady as she clutched her purse. You slipped up. Nathan stared at her, his face unreadable, but something moved behind his eyes, a flicker of calculation, of rage, of something darker. You've always misunderstood me, he said, his voice soft but laced with venom. No, Clara replied, her voice firm despite the fear clawing at her chest. I think I finally understand you completely. She stood, her movements slow, deliberate, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. As she turned to leave, her eyes flicked back to the counter, to the bottle he'd tried to hide. Nathan noticed her glance and shifted, casually stepping in front of it, as if stretching. I should go, Clara said, her voice steady. I've taken up enough of your time. Give Susan my best. Nathan's smile returned, tight and cold. I will, he said, his voice light again, but it carried an edge that made her skin crawl. Clara stepped outside, the cold autumn air hitting her like a slap. She didn't stop the recording until she was back in her car. Doors locked, engine running. Her hands shook as she sent the audio file to Detective Daniel Reyes, her thumb hovering over the send button for only a moment before pressing it. She drove straight to St. Mary's Hospital, where Susan lay unconscious, her daughter-in-law Laura sitting beside her, eyes red from crying. Clara told Laura everything, the cookie, the bottle, the test results, Nathan's slip. Laura listened in stunned silence, her face crumpling as the weight of it sank in. By the time Clara left the hospital, the sky was heavy with dusk, the horizon bruised purple. She slept on the couch that night, the hallway light burning, her phone within reach. Every creak of the house made her sit up, listening, her nerves frayed to the breaking point. At 3:17 a.m., the phone rang, and she answered without hesitation. Mrs. Bennett, it's Detective Reyes. His voice was calm, professional, but urgent. The audio, combined with the toxicology report from Susan's bloodwork, gave us what we needed. We've issued a warrant for Nathan's arrest. Clara exhaled, a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Thank you, she whispered. Nathan was taken in before noon, quiet and composed, as if he'd rehearsed the moment. Clara didn't go to the station. There was nothing left to say. Over the next few days, Susan began to wake, her recovery slow and unsteady. She was confused, then grateful, then silent, her eyes haunted by questions she didn't ask. Clara sat with her when Laura couldn't, holding her hand in the sterile hospital room. One afternoon, Clara squeezed Susan's hand and whispered, I'm sorry. Susan squeezed back, a single, wordless gesture that said enough. Laura came to Clara's kitchen later that week, her face pale, her voice trembling. I should have known, she said, tears spilling over. Nathan was distant, strange. I found journals in his office, pages of notes about plants, extractions, dosages. I thought he was just stressed, maybe experimenting with some herbalist nonsense. The police had found more posts on obscure online forums, written under a pseudonym, detailing the use of monkshood and other toxins. The language clinical, chilling. The terminology matched the poison in Susan's blood, in the cookie Clara had saved. It all came back to one choice, the cookie Clara hadn't eaten. On a quiet Tuesday morning, Clara took the Tupperware container from the fridge. The star-shaped cookie was still there, its icing dulled but intact. Detective Reyes had given her an evidence bag when Nathan was arrested, suggesting she keep it, not for revenge, but for clarity. Clara slid the cookie into the bag, pressing the seal shut. It felt heavier than it should. A small, Sweet relic of betrayal. She cleared a fireproof box from the hall closet and placed the cookie inside. Along with the card from the package. Happy birthday, Mom. Let's start over. She locked the box and set it on the highest shelf. A reminder of what she'd almost missed. Of the son she'd raised and the man he'd become. Clara stood in the kitchen. The house silent around her. The air still. The weight of it all pressed against her. Guilt. Relief. Grief. And something deeper. Older. That she couldn't name. She turned off the light and walked down the hall. The shadows long and heavy. Unsure if she'd ever feel safe again. Or if she ever truly had.